we just sort that out.
Yeah.
Or actually,
Okay.
sorry, just dealing with some technical things here.
Okay, so while you're doing that, I'm just going to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to happen fluidly and seamlessly. And I'm going to show you some slides, some photos of, first of all, Dharma Action Network, and then Exiled Buddhists in Action. And I'm going to do that just without comment, really. Partly because I think it's more sort of effective that way, and also saves time. Okay, so I'm just going to essentially leave the photo up for a few seconds and then just move on, and just the invitation to see what arises in you as you look at these pictures. Okay. So let's just take a little moment, just maybe take a breath, just allowing whatever arose during that viewing, making room for whatever's present. Okay. So now me and Katja are going to engage in a sort of free-flowing conversation. We're going to ask each other questions about our activist experience. I know you've asked me to spotlight, so I'm just looking at, yeah, okay, I don't really know how to do that.
It's the 3 dots on top of your picture and my picture.
That's right, yeah, I've got that. And then what I've got there is spotlight for everyone. I don't have spotlight for...
You can put spotlight for everyone, and then people can undo it on their screen, but that will be what appears in the video.
Right. Okay, and then I'll do the same for you, yeah? Add spotlight. There you go. Lovely. How about that? We're there. All right. Okay, so yeah, gosh, it's 2:15 already. Let's do what we can to be interesting but efficient. Okay, so Katja, I'm going to ask you the first question. You ready for this? Okay. So tell me what's your best and most inspiring moment from your activist life?
Oh, what a question. It's really difficult to answer that because I don't know, there are so many, not just so many different moments, but each action I go through so many different phases because like being at an action or at a protest, it can be quite changeable, quite maybe even volatile sometimes. Yeah. And but if I have to pick out one action, I think one that I really not sure if it maybe was my favorite or definitely had quite a lot of meaning for me was last September when we did an action at the JP Morgan Bank with a bunch of healthcare workers. And it was really interesting because we had planned this quite a way in advance. And it was supposed to happen it did happen very early in the morning. And I really had a feeling the night before that this was my offering to, I don't know, the world. Sounds a bit cheesy, but yeah, I definitely had a very particular intention. And then we arrived and it didn't go to plan, like not at all. Like there was so much security in what we had originally planned, involved people climbing, and it didn't go to plan at all. But what did happen, and then we had to improvise, and then I don't know, 20 minutes into the protest, the private security turned up and said, like, look, can you please leave? Otherwise, take you away. And it was really interesting because by that time national media was already there, and so when they started carrying us away, it was live on not TV but you know, the little video clips on news pages. And then we were sitting there on the grounds of the tube station because that was public land, and we're a bit sort of like, okay, what are we doing here now? But what happened was that we actually then started talking to the public that was sort of like going in and out of the tube station. And there was and we interacted with a lot of people, and I talked to a lot of people, like even people working at JP Morgan, working at a pharma company there on Canary Wharf, that was. And I think what really sort of like stuck with me, this action, was like how it really didn't go to plan, but at the end of the day, it felt really, really meaningful, and it felt like really like even some of the security really interacted quite positively with us. Like, so it really felt that on a sort of like human to human basis, we were seen, or like there was some interaction. So yeah, I think that was sort of like definitely one of the actions that were particularly meaningful for me. Yeah.
I loved your comment about it being like an offering to begin with. That was beautiful. And also I think what you're saying about talking to security guards and so forth, I've experienced the same thing with like police, actually. It's always kind of, it feels good, almost sort of healing, to reach across that apparent divide. So you're speaking to people who are, you know, on the other side, as it were, you know, trying to stop you do stuff, and authority and that. And when you can really, connect in a human way, I think, that feels like something's happening. So appreciate what you're saying there. Sounds like a really creative action, and quite courageous of you as well. Okay.
It's interesting what you say about like reaching through the divide. So I think one of the things that I'd sort of be interested to hear from you is, because I mean, often when I talk to Buddhist friends about like this type of activism, nonviolent direct action, there are sort of concerns around like the ethics of it, because it can involve blocking things or obstructing something, getting in the way of people's day-to-day life. And yeah, I was wondering how you sort of like thought about the ethics of that from a
Yeah,
Buddhist perspective.
that's I sort of think about it as the hard problem, you know, I don't know if you're aware, the hard problem of where consciousness comes from. It's a bit like sort of, this is the hard problem of activist life, particularly for a Buddhist. So, and in fact, I was asked that very question, not by a Buddhist, actually, she may have been Buddhist, but I was giving out leaflets in Hertfordshire with my local group. And she asked, she made these 2 points, which I think are the usual kind of go-to and reasonably asked inquiries or responses. And what she said was, when she saw it was an XR logo, she said, don't really like XR because, first of all, they get in the way of my business, right? She was a businesswoman, okay, so they interfere with my business. And the other thing she said was, they stop, you might stop an ambulance and then someone might die. And that last point about the ambulance was made by a Buddhist friend, actually, on a recent Zoom call. So, I think I'd like say initially, I don't feel that comfortable doing it, but I do it. And this is the reason, right? I think in order to respond to objections that I hear, from Buddhists and others, one has to kind of place yourself in the reality of what is happening, right? A question like that and a response to it has to be kind of situated in the reality of the climate and ecological emergency. If you're standing on a street, everything looks pretty normal, the sun's shining, people are going about their business. Sitting on a road and annoying people, seems just annoying, right? If you tune into, in a heart way, and in a really kind of, allow yourself to touch into the crises the multiple crises that are descending on us from, the climate change, from the loss of biodiversity to injustice, all these kind of intersecting crises, which we're kind of barreling towards. For example, we know that we have to reduce our CO2 or carbon emissions by 50% or so in the next 8 years. And we can see the graphs going in exactly the opposite direction. We know also, for example, that something like, I think it's 30% of landmass will become uninhabitable if the average global temperature goes to about 3 degrees, which it's on track to do. We know that there's I don't know if you know this, there's this thing called the Doomsday Glacier in the Antarctic, which is the Thwaites Glacier, which is gradually, or not so gradually, beginning to crack and move into the sea. And if that goes, then the whole of the Antarctic ice shelf may then follow, because it's like a cork in a bottle. And then sea level rise could go up, many meters. This could happen anytime somewhere between 10 years time and 100 or 200 years time. The scientists don't know, but what they do know is that everything is happening much, much quicker than was originally predicted. So those are just, the reason I say that is to just give you a flavor of the fact that something bad is happening, folks. The best analogy I've heard, oddly enough, is from an LBC presenter, actually. And what he said was this. He said that, imagine you're on a bus, right? And the bus is going on quite normally. Everyone's looking at their phones, like, usual, average day. And then some idiots start getting up and shouting. And you think, oh, for goodness sake, shut up and sit down, right? What are you doing? And then it gets worse. They start grabbing hold of the steering wheel right? At which point, of course, you're on your phone ringing the police. We've got some really crazy people here doing something really dangerous, right? And then you look out the front window, or out the window, and you can see there's a cliff edge coming. Right? Suddenly, everything makes sense. Suddenly, you see people that looked like they were crazy and annoying, actually as potentially life-saving. Right? I think that's a very good analogy, and it speaks to this, the urgency with which we need to inhabit the truth of what is happening. From a Buddhist perspective, slightly more Buddhist-y perspective, I guess, it's a bit like the difference between knowing you're going to die, right? You know, everyone, if you are super, yeah, I'm going to die, yeah, you're going to die, right? Everyone knows they're going to die, but they don't really know it, right? They don't really believe it. They see it all around them, but they don't really believe it. So it's a little bit like that too. And of course, Buddhism asks of us that we face into the truth, right? The truth of our lives, the truth of the way things are, the truth of birth, suffering, death, the truth of interdependence, but not to turn away. So I think Buddhism helps us to do this. But nevertheless, Katja, as you're saying, I think within Buddhist circles, there's a lot of concern about doing anything at all that is difficult for others. And I think, well, I suppose to pare down what I'm saying, and it's a huge simplification, is it's a matter of perspective. Yeah, so I mean, I could say more, but I think that's all I'll say. I probably said quite a lot already.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think another important point that I also often, I think, like to raise is that, I mean, Buddhist ethics is an ethics of intention. And so I think what the task for us is also to look at what mental states we're coming from when we're taking part in activities like that.
Yeah.
And that we're not coming from a place of greed or ill will, but from a place of love. Yeah.
I think that's really good, and thank you for adding that. And implied in what I'm saying, I hope, is that it's a compassionate act to do something which, you know, has the potential to stop great suffering. So, but thank you. And I think all of our actions, I think, may be obvious from the photos, you know, are deeply embedded and come from our Buddhist faith. So yeah, I think that's, but since we're talking about Buddhism, surprisingly, let me ask you this. Have you had any, I mean, it's kind of close to what we're saying, but have you had any conflict with your own faith tradition when, you know, when you were deciding that you're going to get engaged in direct action or you know, XR, was there a sort of process in that where you were weighing up and thinking, oh, I'm not sure this is really in line with my faith tradition? I just wondered if you could share some of the process, if you have any, about that movement into activism, and if there's any conflict really with your faith tradition as you did that, anything you had to wrestle with.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I didn't actually think about it before I got involved in this type of actions. They felt right to me as an expression of what I care about. And so I think at the time I didn't have, I didn't sort of like have particular questions about it. But I think I learned quite quickly that not everybody is particularly agrees with that type of activism. But I think what I have tried is to I think just, I mean, partly just where I can just open up a space for a conversation around like the climate and ecological emergency and potential responses to it, and this activism as one of the potential responses to it.
Right.
And also to do that within my tradition and at our local Buddhist group, for example. And but there is quite a skill to holding and opening up those sorts of conversation, I think, is what I've learned. I do it differently now than I did it at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the other thing that also sort of like really helped was to, so we then actually, with a few people who I guess at one point were or are still involved in exhibitors that are part of our tradition, we then started to set up a climate change group within Triratna, the Triratna Arts Sangha. I do actually know that a couple of the audience members are a part of a local group of that. So there is something about it's a bit sort of like, you know, well, if I talk to somebody, I mean, some obviously some people don't have climate change on their minds, yeah, and nowadays it's fewer people than that, yeah. But and so for them it's a bit about like raising awareness, and for those who are aware, thinking about like what are effective things that they could be involved in. And then for those who are maybe inclined that to do something about it, would they come along to a vigil which has got a low chance of arrest, that is sort of like standing out in the street and meeting some other activists. So I think for me there is always something about like where are people at, and what is sort of like the next step that they could take, which is maybe like a little bit out of the comfort zone. And that's also how I think about my activism, like where am I now, where do I feel comfortable, what would be pushing myself a slight bit out of my comfort zone. So this idea of skillful means, which is quite a well-known concept in Buddhism, is relevant here around those sorts of conversations within, or I guess, institutions, organizations, but also with individuals.
So it sounds like, I'm slightly envious. I mean, it sounds like you sort of segued into action really quite, you know, without feeling the whole time that the actions you were taking were in alignment with your faith. It doesn't sound like, and this is not a judgment like you should have been, but it sounds like it was a fairly, I don't know what to say, smooth, or it's kind of smooth transition in a way, or an obvious way to move or something.
Yeah, I mean, I had the luxury of dance already existing.
Yeah. You were dancing already.
You and other people.
Yeah.
And that's something where I could really see myself in, because I've been involved in other types of activism a while ago, where there was a lot of othering, a lot of blaming, a lot of burnouts, and I wouldn't been able to like see myself there. But I think that really sort of felt to me, it really sort of resonated with how I want to be in the world.
Yeah, beautiful. So you're kind of pointing to the qualities and the way that dance and then exile Buddhists kind of conducted themselves, and their firm sort of connection with faith tradition, and that really kind of spoke to you. Okay, I'm aware of the time. Should we do one more question? It's been good.
Let's do that.
And
actually, what I'd be interested in, because as I said, like I remember, like I don't know, I think you've been doing this for years and years, like Barclay sections and dance and that sort of stuff. So I guess one of my questions to you would be like, how do you keep going, like over years, but also in the what to me feels like just like ever more crazy situation we live in? Like, how do you keep going, and how do you keep on coming from like a place that is alive and full of compassion?
It's a very good question. As soon as you mentioned Barclays and, you know, how do I keep going? Barclays is sort of a habit now, you know, I just can't stop doing it. But yeah, because I've been campaigning against Barclays for, I don't know what it is, 6-7 years, something like this. Not making much difference, but anyway. But to take it more seriously, I think what supports me in the sort of, on the endurance, or sustaining sort of question, I think it's just touching in really again and again to what matters. I think there's two things. There's that, right? Touching in again and again to what matters for me means touching in and again and again about that I mind, right? That it brings me I suppose my grief actually is a very powerful, interestingly, very powerful motivator. Might be an odd thing to say, but grief for me connects with love, right? Because you only grieve what you love. So for me, it's grief is the most sort of available emotion, I suppose. But it opens the door to others. It opens the door to love, to care, to joy, so forth. So I think that's one thing, is making room for and touching in to grief, to rituals of grief, which kind of softens the edge really of despair, if you know what I mean. You know, if you I recently heard this scientist who was talking on a Just Stop Oil podcast, and wow, he was just completely like relentlessly telling it like it is, and it was very difficult to hear, even though I knew some of it, didn't know all of it. That was very hard, and I could feel myself sort of edging into panic, despair, depression. But I think it's if you then tune into, you know, the effect of that really, or what I really care about, what's actually being damaged, right? For me, for whatever reason, from my childhood, I won't bore you with, but for me, it's the natural world that really stimulates. When I see that damage, when I see a tree being cut down, when I see a koala bear, you know, wandering around in the Australian bushfires with its fur on fire, looking bewildered, looking, you know, just looking around, not knowing what's happening. That's what both brings grief but sustains me. The other thing I would say is community. You know, you can't do this alone. That's something I absolutely know, that it's the power of connection with a group of people who share your values and share your hopes, and who you can feel at ease with. You can't do very much at all without that. Yeah, so I think it's both of those things. It's connection with myself, mainly for me at the moment through the lens of grief, and connection with the Sangha, which, you know, is exiled Buddhists for me. So relieving to be able to talk honestly about the climate crisis and my feelings about it, when so much of, you know, the public, let's say, just don't want to. Thank you very much. So yeah, it's a sort of moment. It's like sanity. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that was interesting. Yeah.
I mean, this last point that you make about Sangha, I think, I really agree with that. And it's sort of a bit odd, because I think often as activists, we want to do the doing and want to meet on the streets. But I think in Activism, we have been quite good at sort of like meeting regularly, also on Zoom, and just checking in and seeing how we are. And that is, I think it's really powerful. And I often have a feeling like people get me, they understand where I'm coming from. And yeah, I really appreciate that aspect of Sangha.
Yeah, I think I've noticed that, you know, compared to my local group here, East Hearts XR, we do a lot more. We make a lot more room for meeting ourselves and each other. It just has a higher valence, or just paid attention to a lot more. And I think that's really helpful. Really appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. So it's been good talking to you.
Yeah.
So should we open it up now, Katja, and see if there's any reflections or questions? I can see there's one question from Sandra. Should we take that first? Or,
yeah, let's do that. And meanwhile, people can have a think about what
yeah.
questions they might have.
Yeah, okay.
So how do you organize and design actions? How to get people engaged? I find powerful the fact to sit and meditate, but most people seem to think that you must be a Buddhist to do so. That's a really interesting point, because I think I mean, sometimes we just sit somewhere with our group. But Joe quite likes it when people wear black clothes. He has got that eye for like what's gonna look good on a photograph. But occasionally, we have also been doing like mass meditations in Trafalgar Square, or walking meditations. And I think another inspiring moment is like when you close your eyes at the beginning of the mass meditation, then you open your eyes and suddenly there's like 2 or 3 times the amount of people, because they just join in. So I think depending on how it's set up, I think you can get people to join in.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would think that, I mean, just to be a little bit pedantic, you don't have to be a Buddhist, but it might help to be a meditator, because, you know, you're sitting for a while, essentially, you know, whatever it is, half hour or something. Although, you know, there's nothing wrong with coming and then leaving. But, you know, if you've got the capacity to sit on the ground with a cushion and close your eyes, actually, just mentioning this, my daughter came along to an action. This was some 3 years ago, something like this, outside Parliament. And she'd never meditated before, and she sat for an hour, you know, without any problem. Of course, she complained to me afterwards, but that's another story. Yeah, so she could do it. I mean, it's not, you know, sitting with your eyes closed. You know, I mean, it's not quite meditation, but it's something you can. Yeah, it's not quite the same, but it's at least you're being there. I don't know if that answers the question. How to get people engaged? How do you organize? Yeah, well, how do we organize? You know, we basically discuss before any action what we're going to do. And on the whole, our designs are centered around some form of meditation, whether it's sitting or walking meditation. They tend to have a kind of a slow, poised, grounded, equanimous sort of quality to them. And actually, I think that makes them strangely powerful. So we're not, you know, while we're doing anything loud, quite the contrary. And that can be very powerful, I think, as a sense of rootedness, or focusing on the sort of vertical axis rather than the horizontal, you might say. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you feel free, by the way, to actually speak, but we'll go through the questions. It says, how do you deal with Carmen asks, how do you deal with other activists who are full of anger? Yeah. What have you found to be helpful? Yeah. Interesting, that. I don't know if I'm imagining this, but I don't think I've come across an awful lot of XR activists who are full of anger. I don't know if that's your experience, Katja. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, Definitely one of the reasons why XR has felt to me and still feels to me like a good place for Buddhists is because that I think in terms of the principles and the culture, it does feel quite aligned with Buddhist values in terms of like the non-blaming, non-violence. That's really one of the things I've really appreciated. But I mean, in the spur of the moment, particularly around like the police maybe sometimes, or it can be, I mean, there can be quite a lot of energy building up, depending on where you are and what's happening. But that's, I think, a more of like a moment to moment thing, and there is a lot of trained escalators now who know how to diffuse the situation. So yeah, I mean, what helps to communicate with people who are really full of anger? I think it's difficult to make a generalized statement, but it's sort of like trying to, I don't know, trying to see the common, if it's not directly directed at me, it's sort of like my assumption, see the commonality and try to get to like the heart of it, like what is the sort of like the concern or the hurt that's sort of like underneath it.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful comment. I mean, most of the anger I've encountered is from, you know, the public. And there's a very helpful XR training in this actually, and I think it makes sense. It's, you know, if someone's really angry with you, not a lot you can do at the moment that they're shouting at you. All right, so for that period of time, it's the invitation, I think, certainly from a Buddhist practitioner perspective, is to ground yourself, to breathe, you know, to stay with yourself rather than, you know, kind of going over to them and worrying about them, but to just stay with yourself and, you know, use your practice to remain grounded. And then usually people can't shout at you forever, so they'll sort of begin to lose pace or something. And then you might say, so, you know, you might reflect back. So, you know, this is something you really care about or you mind about or something. You know, as Katja said, if people are angry for a reason, I mean, I had a taxi driver, not exactly shouting at me, but, you know, being cross for quite some time in the 2019 rebellion, I remember, you know, because he was stuck with a passenger, he couldn't move, you know, it's understandable. So I think you have to kind of weather the storm, and then when things are a bit calmer, you might be able to get a conversation going, which probably will start with, you know, wow, that sounds difficult, or yeah, so you're saying such and such. So you start with a reflective statement and then see if you can get some conversation going. The experience with the woman I spoke to, which I mentioned in relation to Katja's question earlier on, who was angry about ambulances and so forth, and us stopping an ambulance and her business and so on. I didn't really get the chance to speak to her, but I did say that I was concerned too about someone dying, you know, getting stuck in an ambulance, and that seemed to matter. I didn't say just I, actually, I said, yes, we, you know, within XR. That's a considerable concern to me. And we do have policies in place, I said, to make that less likely. So I think that was helpful.
There's another question in the chat, but I also know Andrea has got a hand up. Maybe let's go with Andrea to mix it up a bit.
Yeah.
If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we go to Adam's question in the chat.
Thank you. Firstly, do we need more training to develop those skills you mentioned, Katja? Secondly, at the moment, everything is going in the wrong direction with the war in Ukraine, and the fuel duty has been reduced. Nuclear plants are Johnson's idea of a solution to the crisis. Shell is thinking about developing cambio oil, etc., etc. Barclays, we've been going on for years and years, and maybe, you know, shareholders action is a compliment. So what about active hope? What about overwhelm? You know, what about effectiveness, dare I say? Thank you.
Okay. So I think, are you, Andrea, are you asking a question about sort of dealing with despair, or letting go of results, or of whether it's worth it to carry on, which I guess is a bit like despair? Is it something like that you're asking about?
Well, let me be more specific. Jake Dartington at a retreat on Sunday, you know, was talking about Joanna Macy, etc. Anyway, he was talking about active hope, and he was saying it's about letting go of a specific outcome, right? Letting go of a specific outcome, but nevertheless, without going into detail, you know, he was heartened by active hope and making the smallest gesture possible for individuals, which all add up within the community, which all add up and add up. I can't add any. No, certainly not despair. It's just that,
yeah,
you know, how can we hone what we're doing? Or should we be looking to hone it in any way? I can't be more specific than that.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not sure about the doing part. I mean, I think we're doing what we can, but I think the hope part, the active hope part, I mean, I think Joanna Macy wasn't keen to put hope on the title of her book, Out of Active Hope, but the reason it's active hope is that she was saying that there's something, I guess, hopeful, if that's what about acting, about doing something. And I think that the hope in that is that, if that's the right word for it, is that we're acting in alignment with our human, with compassion for the world. And I think there's hope in that. And there's hope in spreading that, you might say. One would hope that it's sort of contagious, or that people begin to see what is happening and respond to it with the heart of compassion. So I think that's what sort of, I guess, matters to me. And I think it's what gives me hope, is that there is the beginnings of an awakening. You know, if you just look at the number of NGOs now in the world, or equivalent to NGOs, it's something like, I think it's in the region of 2 million or so. There's an awful lot of small organizations and NGOs working in one way or another for, you know, the betterment, for protecting, you know, children, or working with vulnerable women, or minorities, or doing, you know, work with in forests and so forth. There's something like 2 million of those. There's a lot happening in this, on that sort of small scale, but there's loads and loads of those groups. And that's been described, I can't remember by who, as the immune system of the earth. It's a rather beautiful idea, that these things are arising in order to protect the earth and species. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question. It's more of a response, really. Any other thoughts, Katja?
It made me sort of think what you said, and I also noticed there's a comment by Chrissy in the chat about like the impact of actions and that sort of stuff. I really like Ai Weiwei, the artist, and there is an exhibition by him in Cambridge at the moment. And in one of the videos, he sort of talks about that at the end of the day, because he's always been interested in like protest, but also like what state repression, what happens when states repress protest. And he sort of like said in one of the videos, like at the end of the day, you're doing what you're doing also to be able to look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day, to be congruent with your values, and that does something deeper to you. Just living in congruence with your values and what's important to you, I think is already a sort of change that's really, really fundamental. And I think, yeah, that's something that really resonated with me. And I think that is something that where we all do have an effect, because that I think also then communicates itself in our environment.
Yeah. So that's living in alignment with your values, with what matters. And I think, yeah, that communicates itself. Yeah, I think that's right.
I'm just wanting to not forget about Adam's question. So he said, Rob Burbia mentions in one Dharma talk that some Buddhists do not see the world as worth saving. In their view, it's only samsara. Is that view still around in Buddhist circles? Hope not.
I hope not too.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very nice, does it?
No, and it's a bit simplistic, and it's a sort of bypass. It's a kind of spiritual bypass, really. So I don't know if you might be better to answer that, Katja. Don't feel I'm very embedded in a kind of because I'm a Vipassana practitioner, you know, we're all like these little isolated practitioners. Occasionally we say hello to each other and then we forget and drift away. But so I'm not part of a Sangha. I have to say, from just my experience of my own, you know, just actually encounters, I don't think that's around very much within the Vipassana tradition. You know, we're a bit more westernized and so on. But I think there's plenty of sort of denial or indifference, but I don't think that's not the rationalization for that indifference. I don't know if you've met with it, Katja, maybe you haven't. You know.
I mean, that particular sort of like reasoning, I don't think I've encountered. I think what I've encountered quite a lot is sort of like it's sort of like view that this activism stuff, it could be political and must not be political because politics is bad, sort of thing. And I think, yeah, and I think there is plenty one can say, sort of like looking at the life of the Buddha and the conditions we need in order to thrive, that there is a case for compassion towards all beings, and that also includes caring about what's happening with the environment at the moment. What I find really interesting, although I don't encounter that view so much in Buddhist circles, but occasionally people sort of like saying like, oh, it's just the immune system of the world getting rid of the humans, we're like a disease. But I think even that is a really wrong view, because we're taking so many species with us and we're causing so much suffering to other beings that, I mean, even if it was so simplistic that this is the immune system of the planet acting, I think it's, yeah, it's, I don't think that's a, yeah, way too simplistic view, I think.
Yeah, I suspect that a lot of these reasons are actually ways to, as I said, sort of evade one's actual feelings about the reality of what's happening, you know, a comfortable or more comfortable little silo, you know, that you kind of build for yourself. I could say something, but I'm aware of the time. So look, should we have a brief meditation and then say goodbye? Would that be anything else? I
mean, I'm guessing most people who are on this event will know, but yeah, there's a really heartfelt invitation to join us on the 9th of April. I didn't want to forget to plug that.
Yeah, nice one.
And if you scroll up in the chat, you can see a post from Joe with like all the relevant links to get up to speed with what we're up to.
Yeah, and there it is again.
And there it is again.
There's no escape, folks. All right. Okay. So yeah, so let's do a little moment of meditation before we say goodbye. So